You're listening to Extra Textual. This is a show where we talk about an idea, concept, theme, trend, and relate it to some kind of media like film, TV, video games, books, music, and hopefully discover something about ourselves or our culture along the way. Thanks for listening. Welcome to the show. This is Extra Textual, and I'm Eli Steenledge, and with me is
Jeremy Holiday.
On this episode, we are talking Marvel Cinematic Universe.
The MCU.
The MCU. Kind of overall, and how things are sort of wrapping up for this section, what they sort of call their different phases, which I think this is phase 3, I want to say, is what they're talking about. Something like that. So we'll be kind of discussing what it might look like for phase 4 for Marvel Studios and what they might do with that. But we'll kind of talk about storytelling and how the MCU has sort of transformed film narrative and how we tell stories over... Is Endgame 22 or 23 films? Do you know? I want to say it's 22.
Yeah, I think it's the 22nd.
Yeah. So that is kind of unprecedented in of itself to tell a story over that many films and to be that popular. So yeah, we'll kind of relate this to some other film franchises and what that can do. But I think we want to kind of look at how they've sort of wrapped this up and pulled it together, what they've sort of done to transform narrative and storytelling in this format, and what that might look like for other franchises. And a little warning, I haven't seen some of these last couple films, but I think I sort of get the feel of it. And Jeremy is here to be our Marvel expert.
Yeah, I mean, in that I have seen them.
Exactly. So, and I have to admit, I am not overly excited to see Endgame compared to apparently the rest of the world. I have not seen Captain Marvel. That's the other one as well, which I'm more excited to see Captain Marvel than Endgame, I would say, actually. More interested to see that. But before we kind of dive into kind of talking about the story and what this might mean going forward, let's just maybe talk about how you felt like things got wrapped up in these, especially Endgame, but I'm guessing Captain Marvel ties into all of this as well. At least somewhat.
Yeah, I mean, for people that haven't, if you've seen some of the Marvel movies and you're thinking of seeing Endgame, like you really have to go. I mean, you have to see Infinity War first to understand what's happening, essentially. Yeah. And then after that, you should see Captain Marvel. One, because it's great. It's like probably one of my top 3 that they've made for a variety of reasons. And because there's the scene that happens after the credits is sort of essential to understanding how Captain Marvel pops up in Endgame.
Quick interjection here. What's the rundown of those top 3 for you? I think I know your first.
Well, the first is Iron Man.
Iron Man, yep.
And I'm going to say it's like it's Iron Man and the first Avengers and then Captain Marvel.
That's pretty good. I would say Iron Man's pretty high for me. I don't think... At least audiences didn't know that was going to be the beginning of a cinematic universe of superheroes at the time. It was just a solid superhero film entry that surprised people. This is maybe not as popular, but I'm sort of a fan. I'll talk more about why maybe, but of like Doctor Strange, actually.
Yeah,
I enjoy it quite a bit. I don't know. I wouldn't say it's like the best, but...
I would probably put it at 4. And then like Thor Ragnarok at 5.
Thor Ragnarok is pretty fun. Yeah. Standalone. But I think Doctor Strange... I was trying to think of any larger connections in that actual film to the larger universe, and I don't remember hardly any.
In which one?
Doctor Strange. I think it's just like... He shows up in the next other films, but I think that is just sort of a standalone... story.
And I think, I mean, if I survey their successes, that film, which introduces our character as they like move from ordinary into the worldly extraordinary, are probably the best.
Yeah. I mean, it's a very Iron Man, Tony Stark storyline origin.
Yeah,
similar, but yeah.
And again, I think the thing that Iron Man that I loved for Iron Man at the time was that it has both an origin story and the first major conflict, right? Mm-hmm. So Tony Stark comes about, and then Tony Stark, because even like we have the Mark I, right? And somebody could have made that film, right? Mm-hmm. He gets out of the desert and we're done, right? Yeah. But we get a whole nother movie's worth of stuff in there, and so and to my mind, they have not crammed that level of conflict and multiple arcs into any of their other films.
Yeah, which I want to talk about more too, but you can go back to the latest film. Endgame.
Oh, yeah. So, gosh, I mean, our listening audiences know that I could not stand Infinity War, I think for a lot of reasons, which I count as logically and emotionally valid. I saw Captain Marvel and loved it for a lot of reasons. Mm-hmm. It felt like, I don't know how to describe it. I don't know what other critics or other folks say, but they were just like a little more loose with their storytelling and focused a little more on characters and how things felt, and didn't focus as much on a whole bunch of details. I mean, I don't know her story very much. I mean, I know her as a character she shows up in a couple other stories that I like. Mm-hmm. But, I think they also changed her story a little bit to fit what they were doing. And she also, I mean, for those like that, like she is like probably the most powerful good guy on planet Earth, with the possible exception of Thor, and I don't know who would win if they would fight, right? Yeah. So we have this person, a normal human being, she comes to her powers. I mean, and there's the first time, so one of the things that I'll say about Endgame as a style is I really feel like it's like a pastiche film. It is like, it's like a whole bunch of like things that are taken from other films. Like Fat Thor is literally the Big Lebowski. I mean, they make fun of him for that various times in the film.
Okay.
Paul Rudd, as Scott Lang, as Ant-Man 2, is essentially like Marty McFly, and great at it. I mean, Paul Rudd is adorable.
Right.
And you have like the first 10 minutes of Endgame, which is, I think, some of the best and subtlest filmmaking that they've made, is like straight out of The Leftovers.
Which
is favorite, yes, season 1, fantastic. Lightning in a bottle, some of the best television that like humankind has ever produced, right? And certainly
also
the most
season 2.
Well, except for the hotel part. But I know you like that. I disagree about 2, but I have no arguments about 1. I think it's fantastic. And so, and there are various other like tropes that they use in there, and I think it's as a result like one of their more successful like full entourage films. I think, and I mean this is just like me shooting from the hip. I think because they admit this in Endgame, they just give up on like making sense. I mean, they do like what like Doctor Who Doctor Who does at some point in an episode called Blink, where he's like blah blah blah, just timey-wimey. Like it's just like whatever stuff happens, we're going on in a freaking adventure, right? And they establish some loose rules at the beginning of their time travel, and they just blow by all of those.
Yeah. But also, like Looper, when he's like, I could explain and diagram this for you, but I'm not going to do that.
However, like, but you do get some amazing moments in Looper, right? You have, like the point at which where they're doing the surgery on the people and it's retroactively changing them. I mean, there's some basic principles of
that they stick
like
to.
Integrity of something. I mean, in Endgame, literally an older version of a person shoots the younger version of themselves. Like I mean, and there, I mean, like I've in my speculative fiction about time travel, I've one of the things I talk about is like in telling a story about time travel, you have to recognize like a primacy, like what is the primacy, like is a given moment in time when you're telling a story the primary point, or is it as some would advocate all points in time are have equal primacy, so you can't like value one over the other because it doesn't sort of work. They just like whatever, like we are gunslinging and rip roaring through time on a time heist, and the thing is like that's the kind of thing that I am apparently really into because I enjoyed it.
It works for you. Yeah.
It's just because even I just like it's like when you and I talked about watching. Alien Covenant. The humans, people just did such stupid things, and I know that like that person was trying to make a point about it. I don't know. I mean, like in Endgame, people make fun of like how stupid the characters' actions were in the first film. Which is what they need to do. I mean, I think that they could not handle the kind of refinement of story that they needed to make Infinity War. And so when they loosened themselves up a little bit and decided to like borrow from the best to make these tropes of people and characters and storylines, it was fantastic. I mean, fantastic is a bit strong. It was solid. And they hit like essentially all the big emotional points they needed to. And I felt like, I mean, this show is always filled with spoilers, so spoiler alert, Iron Man dies for real. And that's sort of what ends this story arc, right? An arc that begins in Iron Man in film 1, it gets wrapped up in here. And there's also really good follow-up sort of post-action epilogue for Captain America and Agent Carter and a whole variety of things. I think like the last, 15 minutes of the film, which is sort of all epilogue. It does really well to tie up those things. I mean, it could be. I mean, they very clearly missed in Infinity War the opportunity to like build a masterpiece. And I don't know what these directors would say about what they did in Endgame, but what it seems like they did to me is they realized that they missed the mark, and they tried to do the best with what they had.
Do you think they were so focused on Infinity War, that sort of surprise ending, like trying to shock people, like build to that they didn't focus on the whole story compared to maybe the way they did Endgame, or just it was just?
I mean, I would say, I want to say that they were really trying to blow people's minds, maybe. But the problem is like, I don't think anybody who watched Infinity War thought those people would stay dead. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's like, okay, so like what kind of creative solution are we going to have? It's probably involving Doctor Strange. It's probably involving Ant-Man.
Also announced like a Black Panther sequel. So it's obvious they're not staying.
Right. And so like this isn't like 1985 or something. Like we are aware of the marketing. Like you can't pull Blair Witch again. It only happens once. That's a particular time. So I feel like they, because at some point, these are epic stories, right? So these are emblematic characters going on heroic journeys, and they need everything that they do, every action that they take, especially big actions, have to be seen as part of a whole. I mean, one of the reasons why epic poems and epic stories end up being so compelling is they are told and retold hundreds and thousands of times over literally thousands of years, I think, many of them. Like classics like the Epic of Gilgamesh and those sorts of things, like they make it all the way to our present time. So they are refined, polished narrative gems. Like, and they become, like Joseph Conrad talks about, like, I mean, Joseph Campbell, these like, they're these like these archetypal journeys. Like I think that's how they come that way. And Infinity War just doesn't do that. I mean, like at every step, like somebody does something really stupid, and as I watch it, I'm like, oh, I know where you have to get. And in order for that to happen, like a whole string of absurd things need to happen
to pull that together.
And I'm just like, okay, like I'm just waiting until okay, great, everybody dies. Great, like ooh, evil wins. And I feel like I could have totally been in for the evil winning part if they would have handled it better. Like if there was like why did they fail to get the gauntlet off him? Peter Quill's an idiot. I'm like, he is, but like it's freaking Thanos, and it's half of human. It's half of like sentient existence in the universe. Like as like dumb as Peter Quill is,
because the narrative said he's supposed to.
Right. I'm like, I mean, so they just, again, I don't. They did not seem to be capable of either writing or editing or polishing that bit of it.
Well,
however,
I was going to say, going back to kind of talking about like this monomyth type idea, I think classically stories are supposed to have like a clear beginning, middle, and end. And I think one of the challenges with something like the MCU is what are those sort of pieces? Because certainly this is a end, but they want to continue this because it's very financially viable for them to keep going. But they can't just kind of keep stringing people all along, trying to bring all these characters together. And I think in some ways, the problems you're seeing are them sort of having to, it's a fact of a big corporate machine trying to push it forward while people are trying to tell these stories in an effective way that keeps the audience running and connected to the characters, and those sort of things butting up against each other and saying like, we can't give you all these detailed things and still have you be able to comprehend what's going on, or for us to even keep it together, and pull all those things together. So
the few things I have to say are, so like thinking about like what is comparable, what is a comparable thing to the MCU. The comparable thing, I think, what I say is like Star Wars universe, but particularly like Clone Wars. Like one of the stories you get in Clone Wars, the really, really long story, is about how the Emperor rises to power. Over the course of his, this is decades, his entire career, which is great. And there's movies and comic books and whatever. It's punctuated, but you do get to see both like serial fun stories in Clone Wars as well as sort of like epic, sort of things. Also borrowing the same thing, which goes all the way back to like television story play in X-Files, where you had like scary monster ones, and then you had sort of fun ones, and then you had sort of these like these lore ones that sort of continue this sort of long story. And I think that like that sort of episodic storytelling gets expanded into the Marvel Cinematic Universe, where you have like, you need to have Captain America, and you need like, one scene in Winter Soldier and one scene in Civil War, like, because you need to know, like, right. And so you have these moments or scenes inside of the larger films that sort of connect to make this larger narrative, and I think they're aware of that, and it works generally well. But I mean, like, I mean, there's a bittersweet part to it. Like in Endgame, like I think the reason they're able to salvage and make it successful is because they just borrow stuff from everyone, and in some sense, to me, that is a recognition of like their abject failure to create new territory with their films. And I know that like things don't have to be innovative all the time, but I think that I don't know if I would ever. I don't even know if I'd say this out loud. I mean, it's not. I mean, like I would have rather have seen some really well thought out, like, if we were to take Infinity War and to spend 2 years workshopping that script, with again, like, I mean, the production. So the other comparable places, I would say, like the Lord of the Rings, because if I think about, so we have like a giant epic story, it's 22 movies, but you also have a giant epic story in Lord of the Rings told very sparsely. Like you could cut together a Marvel Cinematic Universe movie that's 7 hours, 8 hours long, has all these important moments in it from all these films, and that would be a pretty damn good film, right? And but like that's not how stuff is marketed. I mean, like, dear listening audience, make that thing and show it to us. Right? I'm sure it'd be fantastic. How it should have ended, if you ever listen to this podcast, please have at it and then send it back to us so we can see it. And so the question that I have at the end of it, at the end of Endgame is, do all of those moments that don't serve this larger narrative, do we need them?
Superfluous, yeah.
And the answer is, well, I don't know. I mean, like, because if I think back across the 22 movies, I've probably seen most of them, not all.
Yeah, pretty close for me.
There's some, like, really fantastic moments, and I think that's the genius of this fate, of these series of phases. Like, the moment in Captain America when he throws a grenade on the ground, and, like, Steve Rogers is the one guy who goes on it, right? I mean, it's the way in which... or like the moments of characterization that we get in the original Avengers with Cap as he comes back, and with it's those moments where you get to explore those characters, and they're sort of it's a combination of the writing and the actors that are involved and the direction that sort of puts together this really cool animated full life tableau style, iconic representation of these characters that what makes it great. But I think they could have told the story in, 9 hours. You make it a trilogy or a 4 movie series.
That's what I was trying to think through, just sort of trying to reevaluate. Now that we sort of have like the big picture of things, like looking back on what do I appreciate, what works, what didn't. And I also, one of the questions I asked myself was, what is appealing about the Avengers movies? It makes me want to see them. And when it comes down to it, what I remember is like the interaction between the characters. Or I was excited to see, how does Captain America react to meeting Thor, like this Greek god? Like, that's interesting. So, and I would claim that the action's not that good in any of the Avengers movies that I've seen so far. Yeah. It's all right, but it's very forgettable compared to like the
it ain't no Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, that's for sure.
Yeah, I mean, compared to like the character fireworks that happen when they interact,
right?
Like, that's what I remember is appealing, and seeing how these characters come together. And so I think, and in general, I started to think, like, what makes me excited to see any individual Marvel film?
Yeah.
And I've kind of talked about this in the past, and I wouldn't say that I think every X-Men film is genius or masterpiece.
Yeah.
But comparatively, for superhero worlds, there's something I care about the story of X-Men.
Yeah.
That I thought back to the Marvel films. Pretty much all of the story plot, I am never excited about going into the film. Like, there's nothing that I'm going in being like, oh, this plot seems really interesting. Like, most of the time, I don't know who the bad guys are going to be. I don't, like, the thread is sort of, like, fake just to, like, get characters together and do things, especially in the Avengers films. So I think that's why I'm personally not attached to it. Certainly the general public seems very attached or has been made to, but comparatively, I think it is not about the story, but it is, what they've done a good job is creating those appealing characters, and getting charismatic actors to play those characters. Like Robert Downey Jr.'s Tony Stark is really fun and fascinating. And Chris Hemsworth is Thor is pretty magical.
Yeah.
So that's what I sort of enjoy, I think, and people enjoy. So I kind of wonder, maybe we can get there, but when they lose characters or actors like Robert Downey Jr. and Chris Evans, who I think are a draw, are they going to be able to replace those quickly and get people's attachment to new characters? Or are they going to have a new Iron Man, which I think would be a hard thing to establish in the cinematic universe they've created. In comic books, not so weird, I think. But maybe in, the live action world would be hard.
So,
But you can answer what you were going to say. But what do you think is the draw for you to Marvel movies? Or especially like Avengers movies? Like, what gets you excited about those?
Well, it's an interesting question because it's not a very clear answer. I mean, what I'll tell a brief foray because it's a story because it's our podcast.
Yeah.
I remember a lot of it comes from like the experience of my interest being shifted to the limelight of corporate success. In particular, like when Bryan Singer did the first X-Men. Like we had read X-Men as kids, like and a lot of this has to do with like what high school was like in the 80s and 90s. Yeah. Like we were all losers.
Yeah,
like
read comics.
We read comic books. We played Magic the Gathering. We played, like Dungeons and Dragons in our basement, and we didn't have dates, and we weren't jocks, and and we were told we were like never going to amount to anything. And we were weird and strange. And
Star Wars, Lord of the Rings comics were not cool back
then. Yeah, no, I mean, and they were not.
Yeah.
But we still like put our money into buying these things, and we went to arcades, but we were a subculture. And I say this, like, even then, like, and I was like weird for those people. Like, I didn't, like, I mean, I have never totally found a group of people that I'm like, oh, yes, you're my people.
Yeah.
I love my friends in high school. I'm very thankful for them, but like even they would recognize that like I was kind of the third wheel or the weird guy who never really fit there. And Bryan Singer made the first, because we had like Conan the Barbarian and we had the Dolph Lundgren Punisher.
Yeah.
But like the movie, the movies at those times that like the action movies, because this was like the 80s when like so much ass was being kicked. Like it was just dudes on steroids with machine guns, like blowing things up all over the place. That was what the film was. And I think in many ways, like to just cut to the chase, like the Marvel films just replaced those films.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, like in a sense, right?
Yeah.
But when Bryan Singer made that, I know he's a problematic individual, but when he made that that first X-Men, you know, all of us collectively were like, oh my God.
Yeah.
You know, and in the second film, when you have Nightcrawler, because, I mean, the thing that I think is really true, and a good friend of mine, Tim, who's been on the show, has talked about it before, like gay people and outcasts identified with the X-Men. And that's, we identified with the X-Men. They were freaks.
Yeah.
And like, it's their identity as outcasts in their world, which makes their story compelling for me, and I think for all of us.
Yeah.
And they're like a late developing thing in the Marvel world. They're not there.
And I don't think that's something the Marvel Cinematic Universe has.
No, I mean,
that sort of connection to culture and society and what's actually going on.
Thor is definitely cool. Tony Stark is like the male wet dream, right? He's smart and a woman. You know, he's everything, right? I mean, that is not who the X-Men are.
X-Men were,
right? I mean, like, because like, and I say the X-Men with the exclusion of Cyclops, because right, I mean, like, he is an X-Men, of course, but he is like our jock friend who happens to like play video games with us. That is what his role is,
right?
And I think they have occupied that space. And when you think about like the multi-generational stuff, like in Watchmen with the guy who's the owl, the night owl.
Yeah.
Because there's two generations of him, and there's various characters that have either like a protege or, and so I think that like what is most exciting to me about like this phase being over with Marvel, and I know I'm jumping around, is the next generation is essentially the next age. Like at the end of Endgame, like Captain America, who's old, passes his magically restored shield. Fix that for me, please. Continuity to Hawk. Or was it Hawk? Red Wing? Okay, Hawk. Yeah, the guy who was Red Wing, and I think his name's Hawk. Yeah,
sure.
You know, and he becomes, you know, so he's dubbed the sort of new Captain America, essentially.
Okay.
And you have this, you know, next generation, because even like in the Ant-Man movies, like the original Ant-Man is Henry Pym, like Scott Lang is you know, the second generation he's Ant-Man too, right? And so there's a lot of possibility there. I'm skipping around a bit, but further get back to your question, like seeing like the world that we grew up loving, these outcasts who were gifts, were powerful on the screen, you know, and like you know, to be actually able to realize that and have a successful film and you went and see it and like, oh my gosh, it's not weird, you know, or not super weird. It just blew all of our minds.
Yeah.
You know, and then we also get like, you know, Peter Jackson does the live action Lord of the Rings, and there's all of these sort of beloved icons, people that we, you know, the gathered basement dwellers of the world love. Like this was our culture,
our new mythologies,
right? And so to see that was like is always appealing. You know, and like, and we would, and so the appeal of them for me now is sort of twofold. One, I mean, I'm always appreciate like a good epic story, and I don't think Marvel doesn't quite do it the way that I would do it if I were them, right? And I'm not them, you know, and I know, like my kids have such a deep love for Stan Lee, never met him. But you know, they recognize like, you know, he's in all the films, he's in all the video games. They've heard some interviews with him. They know that he created a lot of these characters. You know, everything's always dedicated to him. And I think that there are moments in the MCU as well as some of the earlier films, like particularly Spider-Man 2, where you have these feelings of like this visual image and this gripping story and these interesting characters sort of just draw you in, and it happens at some moments, and I think those moments are rare. I mean, even you know, because in like the original Spider-Man run, it's just in 2. 3 is not very good. 1 is production value is too low. You know, it's like great. I mean, but you're wearing a lame costume, and also in Sam Raimi just lets go with 2. You know, and it's just like we have poetry and you know, it also solves visually much better, but.
I don't know that I have those connections to the newer Marvel movies.
Well, so that's the thing. So I don't, but my kids do, and like and so part of like they're essentially like family films. Like they're a way for us to watch something fun and talk about things, and they still address some of these complicated issues that exist in the world and make a comment about them. But they never. I mean, and
too far. Yeah.
They never quite get there.
Yeah.
There are moments in Iron Man that gets there. There, like I said, there's that one moment in Captain America. There are some moments in a few of the other films. Certainly, Thor Ragnarok has a lot of interesting things to say, but like they never. It's like if you were just to proliferate all these moments, in these 21 films, and just crunch them down and pick like the 40 best moments in the series and write like an epic story about it, like vis-a-vis Lord of the Rings, that story would be fantastic. And I think you'd be able to craft these larger heroic mythic archetypes and have those characters do their thing, but they do so many different things. I mean, how many actions does Thor take over the course of all these films? How many times does Black Widow do these sorts of things? And I don't think that they. Well, I mean, whatever. I mean, no one's ever really done anything like this before, so it's hard.
And I wonder, like for me, connecting to Star Wars, and we have the 9th film trailer came out. And I think we get this weird things, and we've sort of touched on this before, that for whatever you say about George Lucas and let's say the prequels, it is a fairly consistent story he's telling through those. And it's weird to see, we get The Last Jedi, the last film, and it sort of has this new idea that, it's not about being a Skywalker. It's not about this Jedi Order of only certain people are the greatest heroes in the universe. Like, it could be anybody. And Rey is a nobody, we're told at least. And then we get this new trailer and the title, The Rise of the Skywalkers, which hopefully this is not really what they're saying with the film, but it seems to be like maybe the
every
studio
generation has a hero.
Yeah, and right? But it is about the Skywalkers. And then, really, though, that's the story we're telling, is because that's what people want. You want to hear about the Skywalkers, right?
Yeah. Well,
but I think they're also going to be
furrowing my brow,
facing the problem of they're trying to supposedly wrap up the Skywalker story. So what connection? It's kind of the similar problem to the MCU is, are they going to be able to continue and have the same connection to these iconic characters that they've had in the past?
Yeah.
Are they going to keep moving on and have people care about those stories as they face new challenges and things? And supposedly they're not going to continue Skywalker's.
Well, here, okay, so observation 1.
Yeah.
The Rise of Skywalker is a terrible title. I don't know who came up with that. It's terrible.
Probably J.J. Abrams.
2. Every generation has a hero. I thought it was a joke. I thought it was like, I'm going to use some reverb here. Every generation has a hero in a world. I mean, come on, guys. Really? Yeah. So, it wasn't doing it for me. The thing, and so even when we interviewed Annalisa Fillion about looking for Leia, one of the things that was surprising and interesting in a lot of the work that she did in interviews is there were a lot of girls who identified with Luke. Right? And so part of the value of the monomyth or the hero's journey is that we can identify with this hero as they undergo a journey. We exist in a world in which we look historically let's see, what are all the heroes? Oh, they're like white dudes, right? So we need to find a way in our modern world where that fact cannot be ignored to create a hero or group of heroes or a trend, like some kind of vessel for our audience to be able to put themselves in the place of this hero and go with this hero on their journey, right? Yeah. The fundamental reason why we create heroes, I think, is we encounter problems that we can't ourselves fight, and oftentimes evil we can't find or define. So and this is replicated in ritual and stuff all throughout the world. Like when Buffy's mom dies, she's like, "Where's the evil? I want to go. I want to go kill. Where's the big bad?" Right. So we define an evil, we put it in its place, we create a weapon that is possible, capable of killing it. There's a quest to get that weapon. The weapon vanquishes that foe. We then come back to where we came from, the Shire, wherever it happens to be, and we're able to solve that problem that we previously were unable to solve, because it's ultimately about that. So as exciting as if people can't identify with our singular like force wielding hero, then we have failed, right? Because then it can't be the story. Like if our listening audience doesn't have Odysseus or someone like Odysseus or Artemis or someone in the story to have a heroic journey and identify with, it's not as successful as it could be, right? And it's not truly, I think, a great and fantastic story, right? And so that's the challenge, right? Like what kind of hero can really draw everyone in our modern world,
right?
Or at least like the vast majority of people. I think, I mean, in like having a good actor is part of it, having a good story is part of it, but some of this, I don't have the answer. Like, how do we...
I mean, I got another tough question for you.
Sure.
What sort of pleasure do you think general audiences or yourself get out of watching the MCU films? Because I feel like in some ways, like I was mentioning, for me, it's not necessarily about the story.
It's just the characters. The characters are cool.
And I think part of it is, too, for audiences, is becoming this sort of extra-textual exercise of, like, being able to make connections between them.
Yeah.
Like, are you a big enough fan or into it enough that you can understand
it certainly turned, like, the fanboyism, it made it more acceptable.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like we don't need to, like...
Right. Everybody goes. Yeah.
Right. You know, and, you know, it's like the old days of, like, counting the amount of times, like, their lightsaber strikes or, like, light, you know, like laser blasts. I mean, like, that's now cool. Right. I mean, mainly because there's an internet now and there's not internet in the past.
Right.
But I mean, it does give you... I mean, but it's weird because it turns what used to be, like, an absolutely vilified social activity, which was saying, well, actually, like, Superman, you know, like, he doesn't fly, he actually jumps really high because the gravity was much heavier on Krypton, you know?
Right.
Or much more serious than Krypton.
Yeah.
And turns that into, like, a commodity, where, like, that's now really cool.
Right.
Like, I just did it the other day at a rugby practice, and we were like, oh, you know, and there's, like, you know, 20 years ago, like, this was, like, a social taboo, and no one cared.
Yeah.
You know, like...
And I feel like part of the, like, end credits, like, thing that they do is for people to be able to obsess over and be like, oh, that's meant to reference this or set up this concept.
Yeah, no, I mean, I do think that, at least observing my own kids, they really like each individual film as sort of like a window into a larger story that they're putting together with all these different pieces. I think, you know, that's one of the reasons why Captain Marvel is so successful. I mean, you have, for those that watched Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., and you all should, I mean, you in Captain Marvel, you have Carol Danvers fall into a blockbuster and encounter young Nick Fury, who's partnered with Phil Coulson, and you learn how Nick Fury gets his eye patch.
Yeah.
It's a transformed, like, mutant space cat, which is fun for everybody. And you get, you know, and so, like, at first when I saw, because, like, they don't tell you, like, 1981 or whatever. Like, I mean, they do give you all these indicators because she falls into a blockbuster, right?
Right.
But I was like, what the fuck is up with Nick Fury? Like, why is Phil Coulson so young? Like, where are we? What time is this? What's going on?
Yeah.
But you do get to create that experience of, like, your knowledge of having consumed their other media and knowing other stories that adds a lot of depth to it.
Yeah.
And I can't say that, I mean, the experience that, like, the comparable experience for me is, like, when I uber fanboy moments in, like, Lord of the Rings, and I'm like, well, that's actually, like, that's from the Silmarillion. Like, when, you know, and there's like one point, there's one point in the marshes when... Aragorn is singing the song, and, like, this is directly out of the Silmarillion. And there's also the moment which I always got upset about because fanboys earlier is, like, this moment when, like, Aragorn is on this warg and gets drawn off the cliff. I'm like, it happens in the Silmarillion to Beren and Luthien. It is, like, word for word out of there. That is why he's like, you can, like, get all your fanboy stuff in a bunch or upset or whatever, but, like, if you were a real uber fanboy, you would see that it happens in, like, the second chapter of the Silmarillion when it happens in the love affair between Beren and Luthien when you know, one rescues the other. It's how sort of, like, immortality is traded for mortality.
So it's still part of the
but I digress,
world,
right? It's part of the world, and so, like, that kind of moment happens all the time when you're watching these Marvel films, because, I mean, I think for the average person, you go with someone and they haven't seen all of them, so you get to be an expert and say, well, actually, this happens here, and it creates, like, a situation where the more of them you watch, the more knowledge you have about the characters in the world. So it becomes almost like a discovering sort of thing. But again, I think that's, like, as you pointed out, like almost entirely centered around the characters, because the characters themselves are pretty consistent throughout. They don't do things that are uncharacteristic in general. Yeah. The storylines are far more flexible, and even, I mean, there's a lot of like blip blop timey-wimey time travel in Endgame, and it makes for some really iconic moments, but like, Lord knows who has to clean up that mess in a timeline later, because it just doesn't work at all, really. But it's, I mean,
there's some interesting things. I wanted to reference this article I just read called "The Narrative Experiment That Is the Marvel Cinematic Universe" by Maya Phillips in the New Yorker. And she quotes a professor I had at the University of Iowa, who talks about the peculiar narrative qualities of soap operas. I'm going to quote here, which contains narrative twists and turns, but they get nowhere. Unlike most novels and films, soaps are all middle. So both soaps and like fantasies like Lord of the Rings may contain traditional plot-based narrative with moments of resolution or convergence. But, in a sense, such moments aren't the point. It's the fictional world that's most alluring. Yeah. So, like, in soaps, that there are these events that are very major and seem very dramatic, but the story doesn't really go anywhere. Like, these characters keep hanging around for the most part and keep having these lots of drama. But it is about the enjoyment of the world they're in, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm 75% with you.
Yeah.
So, I think it's definitely true of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I think it is not. I mean, like, the allure of Tolkien is the world. I know people say that a lot.
Yeah.
I think it is alluring.
Story. Yeah.
Like, it is a complete story, and it only goes in one direction.
Yeah.
And like the movies,
you're going to Mount Doom. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
And like, it's off in the distance.
Right.
It's like Death Mountain. You are going there. You are, and things happen. Like, people die along the way.
Yeah.
And it's a journey you can take from beginning to end many, many times, but you have to get there. And I think that's, so I take issue with that. And so I think that is one thing that is different between, because like, no one, I mean, like, it's even evident in the way that they write Endgame, like, it doesn't even matter. Like, we're on a time heist party.
Right,
it doesn't matter what's happening. It just matters that we are with these characters in this place. And I think, that's what the allure is for most people. I mean, I think that the character development is great. There are very few of the MCU individual movies that have interesting stories, or that have stories in which anything really happens.
Right.
And so like, I mean, I always personally, this is personal, like, have always, there are two things: soap operas and Michael Bolton. I have always, well, not always, but as an adult, I generally think criticisms of soap opera and Michael Bolton are both sexist, because women loved them, and men were like, "This is crap." Michael Bolton is a fantastic artist, a tremendously soulful singer, a prolific songwriter, and an amazing musician. And I think for a lot of times his work was utterly dismissed because it's just like women liked it. But like, I mean, his songs are tremendously heartfelt, evocative, and I think it's just like culturally, it wasn't for some folks okay to like him. And like, when I was at home, when I was like a latchkey kid as a child, I watched a lot of soap operas, Days of Our Lives in particular. When I, like, for various summers when I was a kid, like, they are compelling, interesting stories that grab your attention from the moment you sit down to like the moment you get up. And there's a weekly schedule, and like when Hope was buried alive, like every Friday for like 4 months, the little bell on her, like the little rope next to the bell on her coffin, I don't know why they still had that, would like almost get drawn. Like, they know how to do a cliffhanger, they know how to get you excited in the world, they know how to draw you in. I mean, they're often dismissed, but it's just like anything that's formulaic. The Babysitter's Club, The Hardy Boys, Sherlock Holmes. If you get a good formula that's compelling, it doesn't matter what's in there. And to call it I always bothered me. It seemed like, well, it's just soap opera. I'm like, well, I mean, it's daytime drama for one.
Yeah.
And two, like, have you ever watched it? Or do you just, like, make fun of it because that's something you make fun of? Like, you just make fun of Michael Bolton because it's something you make fun of. Like, have you listened to Michael Bolton? Have you watched, a soap opera? And, like, it's a different palette, right? Yeah. I mean, the soap opera is an interesting, very interesting visually. It's like, stuff exists in an interesting space-time where it's almost always daytime. I mean, it's an interesting world. But to just summarily dismiss it because, again, I think because, traditionally it was something that women liked, I just, it gets a tisk-tisk from me. Because, again, I mean, it's like if you look at, like, other serialized stories, like, these are the basis of what television and radio. Like, these are the perennial forms of storytelling. Like, is someone going to get out? Will they fall in love? I mean, I think if you listen to most successful musicians that that write songs that have words in them, like there's just perennial things like wanting someone, loving someone, missing someone when they're not there, being worried about them, trying to get them back. These are the human emotions that are the core of our lives. So anything that touches on that, gauche or not, people, it connects with people.
Yeah.
Continue.
True. Yeah. I mean, I think it's interesting to look back now at these MCU films, and for however much I might say I view them, let's say, more as spectacle, is often why I enjoy them. I'm like, I know, like I said, I'm not very invested in, what's the plot of this? What's the story that I have to see this to know? I go in saying, I'm going to have a fun time. Yeah. These are going to be fun characters. I'm going to see some good action, special effects, things like that. Yeah. But they have managed to pull things off that I think have not been done before. So I remember when the first Avengers came out, and at that time I was more in a crowd that a bunch of dads were going to go see it. So I was like, yeah, I'll go along and see it. Wasn't like dying to see it. But I remember watching the trailers and thinking, this is a little hard for me to swallow. Like seeing Thor and Iron Man and Captain America and stuff in the same environment in like a film world is harder for me to take than like on a comic book page, where you can kind of get away like with that. And it's a fun movie. It's solid. It's good. Yeah. And so I was like, wow, they pulled it off. And now we don't really question that at this point in these films. I mean, we are just used to seeing even more characters pulled together than those original ones.
Yeah. So there's this point. I have to make this here. Yeah. So, it's a critical one. It's what I think sorry, Marvel / Disney. I think what they failed to do was like an appropriate, what I would call like escalation of the threat. I mean, I think and I've talked about this before. What happens in the comic books is like, especially with like Peter Parker, like you save your girlfriend, you save your borough in New York, you save all of New York, maybe you save all of the East Coast, then it's the United States, and then someday the Earth from the Russians or something. And then
aliens or something.
Well, and then you lull around for a while and have smaller problems, and then something and like because you've had enough power to beat the biggest thing that's around, and then like the world is peaceful for a little bit, and and this sort of like ebb and flow is captured almost perfectly in The Incredibles when Mr. Incredible is like, why doesn't the world just stay safe, and then some bigger threat has to come because that's what you do. You vanquish threats as a hero,
right?
And I think just because of the way the MCU progresses, because there has to be like one or two arcs in each film, the threats just don't escalate. I mean, like you don't go from like Iron Man to like the Avengers. I mean, you have Iron Man, you have Iron Man 2,
right?
And then you're like a couple other films, and but those threats don't escalate to the Avengers. Like
they don't tie into the Avengers.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't become like the whole point, I think. And I don't know the comics as well as others, but the whole concept of the Avengers is they become necessary at a point.
Right.
The same way, like, when the Fantastic Four gather a group of folks to fight Galactus. Yeah. Like, it's mostly them, but, other people are involved as well. Like, you have a threat that you can't beat.
Yeah.
Right? And so for me, that was, like, the part that I liked most about Infinity War was, like, it opens with, like, Thanos destroying the most powerful people we know, right? that's the kind of thing that, like, okay, cool.
That's a real
like,
threat,
like
yeah.
there's a giant in the playground. This is and this is the progression that happens, like in Babylon 5, like when the humans enlist the help of the Minbari to make all of these spaceships to fight the shadows. Watch it.
Yeah.
And so, like, that's... But, like, the Avengers get thrown together for a threat that's not comparable to their size, right? You know, I mean, given, like, you know, it's the Chitauri, it's the space thing, you know, it's like, it's big, it's extraterrestrial, but, like, it doesn't... The only time that happens is at the beginning of the Infinity War, when Thanos, like, beats the Hulk and kills Loki, and, you know, like, that is the kind of thing that necessitates the formation of the Avengers. You know, it's nearly impossible, I think, to manage that over that flow over the course of 21 movies.
Right.
But I think if you're going to do it, if you want it to be successful, that's what you have to do. You know, like, you know, I mean, if you take it as a trilogy, then I know there are these 3 phases, but, like, it's not like, you know, it's not like Frodo and Samwise running away with the ring because the Fellowship has failed at the end of phase 1. You know, like, where is that moment, right? You know?
I mean, I would say the first Avengers seems more organic kind of threat.
Yeah.
And I like Loki, at least.
Oh, you know
Loki?
Yeah, you know he's
it's interesting. And it ties directly to the characters.
Yeah.
And so I think that was much more organic. Although I think the end threat was sort of forgettable of these things coming through the portal and flying around like they always do.
They got to shoot things.
Yeah. But at least that seemed more personal to what they're doing. And for however much they think that they were introducing Thanos through all these films, I don't feel like they did. It was still like, at the beginning of Infinity War, it was like, oh, this guy showed up. We didn't have enough of a sense of him before that, I don't feel like.
Right.
But,
and I think, and again, like, if you look at Babylon 5, there's this moment early on when, like, this strange phenomenon, like, pops in this quadrant of space where they are. Massive ships beyond, you know, size, beyond comprehension in size and power. Right? And they eventually, you eventually find who these people are.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, like, I mean, they do it by, like, showing Thanos in the throne with the Chitauri. I mean, but, like...
Yeah.
I mean, it's like, oh, it's fucking Thanos. I'm like, yeah. But, I mean, so I guess what I'm saying is, like, for me to feel like Thanos, like, to feel Thanos' true power, we fight him I mean, he gets fought a whole bunch of times. And none of them are particularly impressive.
Right.
And he gets killed twice. But he, you know, like, they did, it's an issue... I feel dumb saying this. It's like an issue of, like, calibration. You know, like, there needs to be some way to put these threats and all these individuals on some kind of spectrum so that we understand them.
Yeah.
And, like, and that's something that they do very clearly with Captain Marvel. Like, when Carol Danvers transforms and truly unleashes her power, which is a moment which, again, is pastiche. I mean, it draws... That moment when she unshackles herself from the Kree controls on her neck, it exactly parallels this moment in the final episode of Buffy the Vampire Slayer when Buffy is talking to Willow about how they're using this scythe to unleash the potential power of all Slayers in the world. And it shows in that example, like, what she does is she says, like, you know, it says there can only be one Slayer at a time. Buffy dies twice, so there are 3 Slayers during her time. But the idea is that there's many potential Slayers, but only one. And she's like, this is just a dumb rule that, like, a bunch of white guys, a bunch of old guys thought up. We're going to turn, like, every girl who could be a Slayer will be a Slayer. And then it has this one of the very few montages in all of Joss Whedon's work. There's, like, a girl hitting a baseball. There's, like, a woman who's being, like, abused in some kind. And all these women sort of stand up and take their power. And that's I mean, like, and Carol Danvers does that. And those moments are moments in her own life. But the girl playing baseball and the girl standing up. I mean, it's I mean, either... You know, if you're going to steal from the best, but it's also either an homage or just, like, a copy. But the moment she gathers her power, she, like, blows stuff up and flies in space. And it's very clear, like, on a scale of 1 to 10, she's a 9.9. Right? And when you have so many different bad guys and so many different good guys, so many different challenges, it's hard to keep all that sorted. But I think the point that I think you're making, that a lot of other people make too, is like, hey, when you lose control of it, you lose control of the story. I mean, and it's one of the problems that I've always had with like Thor as a character. I'm like, he's a god. I know he's not really a god, but he seems to behave exactly like a god. He has a whole lot of power, and he can't really be killed. And like what's the problem? He hits it with his hammer, like, like what's the problem? I mean, and so like again, Thor Ragnarok movie starts, loses the hammer. Great. Or even the original Thor movie, which I like, loses his hammer. And so it's a story about him trying to do his virtue. For those, there's some... Yeah. I won't totally spoil it for you, but, another Avenger wields Mjolnir in Endgame. And it's one of probably the best moments in the film. It is fighting, but it's and Thor goes like, I knew it, right? And of course, you can probably guess who it is. It's a fabulous moment. And there are a number of those moments that make it into Endgame, which are what makes Endgame worth watching. Again, recognizing that this is an art form which is told in disconnected tableaus and iconic moments with limited dialogue, Endgame, that have emotional impact, Endgame pays attention to that a lot more. Like, you could tell the story of Endgame, and it's probably like 100 different stills or something like that, right? And and for that reason, it works in a way that Infinity War never does, because all those moments are all terrible in Infinity War. You're like, and we're about to do it, and then Peter Quill does something stupid. It looks like one of those. It just looks like it's like a blooper reel for like, how do you screw it up as much as possible? But
and I think it is some of those, for me, Marvel films that create their own world that work best. Yeah. So I do enjoy some of the Thor films, like the first one and the third one. I also like the Guardians of the Galaxy films. Yeah. I think overall are pretty fun. But they came at it from their own sort of universe of their own galaxy of a world that eventually interconnects, but brought us into those. And I think those work best for me because they're not sort of trying to fit into their own thing. But I think for how messy the DC universe is, if there is a universe of film, they are going the opposite direction, and it seems to sort of be working for them, of there's not strictly one Batman, there's not certainly one Joker, because now we have the new Joaquin Phoenix Taxi Driver style, and then we had Jared Leto a couple of years ago, and then going back. All the different versions, and they don't seem concerned about it at all. They're just like, well, we can just make a different Joker movie if we want to, have a totally different story. And they're not feeling tied to it has to fit into this one universe of understanding. Which is kind of fascinating to compare. But I think Marvel has sort of boxed themselves into that reality of things.
And that was one of the initial conceptions of Marvel. That's one of the...
That it all fits together.
Yeah, that they all exist. Well, that they exist in New York. Yeah. First of all,
it's a real place,
in our world, and that they all exist in the same world. And I think that doesn't matter almost anywhere. Well, I won't say it doesn't matter. It matters most in the X-Men stories, right? Because this is all across the country, all across the world, people just like us who have weird quirks and talents are ending up being. And who know the world is bullshit, right? Are ending up with someone who is powerful and wounded and can train them, right? That is the dream we all have, right? Or the dream that most of us had.
I think I've said this before, I think, probably on the show, but why X-Men works better for me too is that, for the most part, it's probably a little different in the comics, but for the most part in the film world, there is one singular reason sort of for all the powers and superheroes. Yeah. It's not like this person is an alien and this person has a super suit and this whatever is a Greek god. So it's a little more believable when it kind of brings all those things together.
Yeah, my oldest son, his favorite character is Hawkeye, which I love Hawkeye. My brother dislikes Hawkeye a great deal. He hates the old, the guys whose superpowers are bows. I love them. I love Green Arrow. I love Hawkeye.
Real powers,
Yeah, it's like the Batman character. But the thing is, or even when, in Endgame, God bless them, it was fine fighting. But Captain Marvel gets punched by Thanos and gets knocked into a mountain. Captain America gets punched by Thanos and he rolls on the ground. I'm like,
That's
Captain America would be dead.
Dead, yeah. In comparison,
like super soldier or not, like just dead.
Yeah.
And like I don't like have, and it's like, you know, again, it's like, oh, these are just details. Again, but this is like the calibration of powers. Part of what makes these characters interesting in the comic books and for me is that, like, again, part of what I think makes any given, certainly, like, if you just take the Buffy, like the Scoobies in the Buffy world, like Buffy's near indestructible. Willow eventually has powers. Xander doesn't, right? So, like, you know, Spike joins in there as well.
Yeah.
You know, and Giles. But, like, Giles needs to be protected, and Xander needs to be protected, right? Because, like, as they go into fights, and so the balance of being really powerful and not indestructible has to balance against, like, helping save your friends. And part of, like, and so part of the proper calibration of powers is what makes, I think, Avengers battles, or what should make Avengers battles interesting.
Yeah.
But when Thanos can just punch, you know, like, one of the most powerful celestial beings we've conceived of, Captain Marvel, and Captain America, and who's just a human with muscles and a vibranium shield, and have the same effect. Like, we're not, you know, in the same, like that. And you lose the opportunity for our heroes to be vulnerable, and that has always been, like, my complaint against the character of Thor.
Yeah.
Right. Like, he's indestructible, so what is at stake? Like, what happens?
Yeah.
Like, is there a bad guy he can't hit with Mjolnir or strike with lightning?
Right.
Not really.
Yeah.
I mean, like, apparently he didn't kill Thanos the first time because he didn't aim for the head. You know, but you know, and again, like, I think in Endgame they're just like, and it works for them, and it works as a film. But you couldn't do that 3 movies ago. And you couldn't do that 10 movies ago, and you couldn't have done that 15 movies ago, and you couldn't have done that at the beginning. If the first movie was like this, I mean, I dare say, I mean, I'm not a prognosticator, I dare say they would have not gotten to movie 22. Iron Man works because it is absolutely tight.
It's totally grounded, yeah.
Yeah. And even, like, Captain America, it's a small story, but it's absolutely tight. Like, all these elements work really, really, really well. It gets far more loose as time goes on. Again, like, well, I won't harp on the point. When you include things like Thor or even the Hulk, you know, I mean, I think one of the things that I really like about the Avengers is, like, they're really scared of the Hulk because the Hulk is terrifying, right,
and uncontrollable,
and like he could just kill Black Widow, and so and also, like, Phil Coulson has a weapon which shoots right through Loki, you know, or could shoot right through Loki. They're like those things matter, and I think those things are certainly like when like the Fantastic Four outsmart Galactus, and with the help of his herald, and they're in the comic books there are interesting plot twists, which create interesting stories that we liked to read, and I think that some of that gets lost. In the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Ultimately highlighting that what's important is the characters. I'm repeating myself, but I think, I mean, I lament that a little bit. You know, like, because like, if I think about, like, in Lord of the Rings, you know, one of the ways you can, which I always talk about, one of the ways you can sort of, like, morally evaluate the characters is what they do when Frodo offers them the ring. Right, like, I mean, Faramir is probably the greatest of them in that he abandons the ring to his own demise. Right, had he taken that ring, he would have defended Osgiliath, and he would have been alive and would have proven to his father how great he was. Right, and he, you know, in a way that Boromir could not. Boromir could not willingly release the ring out of his control. But Faramir did. Which makes him the greater of the two brothers. Right. You know, and even the way, like, Galadriel responds to it. I mean, she's able to see her entire world and the entire future and recognize that even her, one of the greatest good beings in the world, even through her, because her power would come from the ring, it would be terrible. Right. These moments don't exist in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I mean, like, these crystallized... And I mean, like, and I think there are... Well... They do, but they are, I put them together in a string having seen all of them. And maybe that's what they intend,
Yeah, there's how many people are going to see those connections?
Yeah.
I mean, there was this thing where they're showing marathons of them in theaters.
Yeah.
And certainly you could watch that at home. People do that. And you may see those threads more clearly. But is the majority of people going to see that?
Yeah.
Maybe not. I do wonder, thinking about, just briefly, where they go from here.
Yeah.
We've talked about a little bit. But certainly, who's to say that, let's say another 5 years of these movies, and they have another sort of endpoint, conclusion of some kind. They can't just say, like, hey, this has kind of reached its generation. Let's totally reboot the whole thing, right? Because that's what they do in comic books at points.
Yeah.
So, and I think that could be still successful. Like, we're going to have new technology for films then. Yeah. And certainly, why can't we reboot things to that point? I did want to mention a weird factor. I recently watched the second Ant-Man movie.
Yeah.
Where they...
Ant-Man and Wasp.
Ant-Man and Wasp. And they make Michael Douglas and Michelle Pfeiffer look younger. And they've done that with Robert Downey Jr.
Yeah.
And maybe somebody else. But it's just a weird thing that they can just do that. And there's the new Will Smith movie where he is supposed to assassinate himself, but he's like 25 years younger version of himself, like a clone. So they're just like, well, we'd really like this movie, but we'd like Will Smith, like young Will Smith, to be in it, not old. And
yeah, well, here's the thing.
They can just do that. Yeah. So I'm not saying it's like not that bad in the Marvel movies, because it's like flashbacks. It's motivated, but I feel like it's setting a weird precedence for...
So, I mean, and maybe I'm whatever. I don't like that. I didn't like it in Tron Legacy. Mm-hmm. I don't like it.
Yeah.
Partially because, one is like this sort of like cyberpunk fear I have that like they will like own all of digital Chris Hemsworth and then like make digital Chris Hemsworth make digital Thor movies forever.
Right. Yeah.
Which I don't think
they can basically do. Yeah.
Right. I just don't think that's artistically good, period. Like, I mean, and maybe like 20 years from now, like there will be totally digital people, like totally digitally created actors that the company owns and they own whatever, and maybe that's going to happen. I think that we are people and we get our emotions from experienced other human beings who have understanding and have spent time honing skills of communicating their emotions to us. I think acting happens from the eyebrow essentially to the spit catcher, and part of what makes any film or any film successful is the actors that are in it.
Yeah.
And I don't care if it's a different. Like when Dumbledore changes or when the Emperor changes, I don't care.
Yeah.
Because I reckon, like, I've seen, plays in which different people play.
Right.
Troy Maxim, know, or like all these other iconic characters. Like, I understand that there is a story and there are characters in that story and they're portrayed by different people. And, I appreciate that in the real world. I appreciate that in film. I don't like it when they do digital people's faces.
There is a film called The Congress with Robin Wright, where it kind of addresses that, and they make a deal with her that she's a famous actress but getting older.
Yeah.
And they say, we are going to scan your likeness and we own it and we can do with what we want.
Yeah.
But you can't make films yourself personally. But we're going to write you this big paycheck basically forever. And so she kind of has to make this deal with the devil sort of thing. Yeah. But she doesn't have control over what they put her likeness in.
If we were to like jump up into space and take a look at our like past 20 years, two of the most authoritarian leaders in the modern world, Berlusconi and Trump, at least in like, we're media moguls. I think like we exist in a world in which there's a tremendous amount of power consolidated into very, very, very few people's hands when it comes to media. So I don't trust those guys. Yeah. I don't think. Sorry for some of our listeners listen to Fox News. I don't think Fox News is a force for good in the world.
Yeah.
I think there are plenty of other parallels. I mean, they're not the only sort of thing, but I mean, like I think if you're listening to a podcast, you very well might not trust a variety of media in the world. I mean, it's a situation that I find myself in lots of times. I'm like, I mean, sure, that makes logical sense, but like, who's paying your bills? Who like what are the larger motivations for the things you're talking about? Like, are your interests aligned with mine? I know all this is obscured and there's multiple levels of ownership and all sorts of things. I mean, like, I don't trust it.
Right.
So I don't like, those. I mean, like, the Time Warner merger. I mean, like, there's like, like one individual or a small group of individuals can make decisions about the vast majority of things that we see. I just don't think that's good for humanity.
Yeah.
Just by
it's getting worse. Yeah. We're planning a discussion soon about some of these new streaming platforms, and certainly that ties into Disney buying Fox and all their content, which means X-Men and MCU now can live in the same corporate world. So we'll see what happens there.
I mean, the hopes that I hold out are for someone to take like Alex Ross's work, who did Kingdom Come and Marvels, and I mean he does hyper realistic DC interpretations.
Right.
I mean Marvel's in the Marvel's universe it does all comic book characters, but for someone to like make the Marvels movie or like to make Kingdom Come or to make like an honest version of like Frank Miller's Dark Knight.
Yeah.
I mean to really to take the next level where we're doing DC Vertigo titles, or we're doing like some of the What If comic books, or like the one like all the different like cool ones like the X-Men in Victorian England, and like those could be fantastic. Great, you've made billions of dollars doing the initial ground laying. Branch out and do some of the fun stuff.
I could be wrong, but I think I've heard about on the Disney streaming service they're going to do a What If Marvel series.
Those are the ones that like I remember picking up that my brother had as a kid and being like, what am I? I mean, because they're just like, what if, there's just one that Alex Ross does. Like, what if like Brainiac controlled Spider-Man and and Batman had a Krypton bullet? All these sorts of like crazy things. And some of it's like terrible. Like, what if someone was made of taffy? But it's also again like as someone who is interested in like these clever stories and cerebral things. I mean, some of those. I mean, I've had conversations with many friends of mine and my brother's older friends too that they're like some of the What If comics were their favorites.
Yeah. Nice.
I mean, I wanted to say two more things.
Yes.
I watched Captain Marvel and Endgame at a local place called the Flicks Brew House. They are not paying me for this endorsement.
We wish they were, but
and I really liked it, and I liked them for two reasons, and they made sort of my Endgame experience really positive for these two main reasons. One, they don't show like advertisements before their stuff. Which I kind of hate and my kids hate. So like
local
I mean some of it's like national, like hey, or like here's like front and center, it's stupid canned crap, like the kind of stuff they pipe to your gas pump now. I mean, how did we get that?
Boring stuff,
which is point one, and point two, they fill that space with like curated content. And so for Endgame, and I don't know who's responsible for it, but they showed essentially like all of these great important moments from previous, versions of the previous movies in the MCU. Like Captain America and the Fight with Winter Soldier and Avengers 2, and so I mean it's almost kind of like a here's what you missed kind of stuff, because they invite you to show up a half an hour early and order your food, which is how they make their money. And it was a great experience for our kids because they hadn't seen some of them. And it just sort of got you ready for the moment that you're in. They also, I mean, God bless them, showed the like how it should have ended. Episode from Infinity War, which has 5 different possible endings to it, all of which are better than the original one, including like Thor cutting off Thanos' head, at the end. And it was just like it added like a a playfulness and perspective to viewing the film that I really appreciated. I mean, as opposed to like, you are about to watch Endgame. You know, where it's just like this, you're just funneled into this corporate experience. Like, isn't it so amazing? Like, let's get some jalapeno poppers. And like, yeah, you know, it's much more like, you know, this is a movie, we're a movie theater, we have some food, we know that you consume various forms of media and you talk to your friends about that media and you have variant opinions about this media, but you're still here today to see this film. So it made it really positive.
I have not had the pleasure of attending the Alamo Drafthouse, but from what I hear, they were maybe one of the first to do that sort of thing, which I think was influenced by that.
Shout out. I'm going to be seeing The Rise of Skywalker at the Alamo Drafthouse in Austin, Texas this December with my friend Marcy and her family.
Nice.
I also wanted to share this. So my friend sent me this book called Keep Going, 10 Ways to Stay Creative in Good Times and Bad by a man named Austin Kleon, who I've never heard of. It says there's a little yellow dot on the book that says, from the New York Times bestselling author of Steal Like an Artist, which I haven't read. But he introduces this concept, which he calls success, which is spelled SUCKCESS, like success. And he defines, so like, I'm just going to read you this one paragraph. It says, where there is no gift, there is no art. You know where success is, or at least you have your own definition of it. Mine is, when my days look how I want them to look. Success, on the other hand, is success on somebody else's terms, or undeserved success, or when something you think sucks becomes successful, or when success or chasing after it just plain starts to suck. Success is what poet John Cocteau was referring to when he said there is a kind of success that is worse than failure. And I was just reading that today, and in some sense, I think there's some element of success with the Marvel Cinematic Universe, in that, like, I think they were able to take what was in some sense like a gamble, like marginal content, marginal intellectual property.
Yeah.
Right. Even like the Bryan Singer X-Men, they're good, not major films. I mean, like, people went to see them and they made a good bit of money.
Yeah.
But, like, make 3, third one's terrible.
Yeah.
So, like, she's a level 5. I mean, come on. Like, could you...
Which they're remaking, essentially.
Terrible.
Yeah.
I mean, and then the remakes, good, I like them.
Yeah.
Much more about, like, people, like, and about emotions and whatnot. The second one, we get Nightcrawler. First 2 are okay.
Yeah.
But, like, you make 4, maybe 5. That's all you get, right?
Yeah.
So the idea, and not super, like, Disney successful stuff. I mean, these are, popular, but, mid-market stuff.
Right.
So then to take, like, the intellectual property of Marvel, huge merger, and to like turn that into a 22 movie run. And I think that they found a lot of success in what they did, but it also trapped them. And I think it forced them, like, if every one of those films had been like Iron Man, I mean, we would be telling a different story about the MCU right now, but they're not. And there are a few gems in it, but it as a whole is, as a whole it works, and it's fun for people.
Right.
But, like, each of the individual pieces are, almost can't stand on their own in many cases, with the exception of a few. Doctor Strange, the Captain Marvel, Iron Man, so the
Black
iconic
Panther,
Black Panther, Black Panther, absolutely. And so they develop something that works, and I think this conflict is played out in Age of Ultron with the conflict that Joss Whedon, who always has conflict with his people, like, work it out. Yeah. Sorry, love you, but do your job. Always ends up conflict with, like, I had a different vision, yada, yada, yada. Other people, I've talked about this before, like, other people like Robert De Niro and various others, like, have very strong visions about what they're doing and still make films that reflect that vision. I don't know why Joss Whedon ends up getting in trouble all the time.
Yeah.
But, and what they, and so, like, the Age of Ultron that comes out is, like, not the, like, brooding think piece that Joss Whedon wants it to be. And, and, like, other films around it who are not directed by him and are sort of guided by their visions, like, they come up with something that's successful. It's a great sort of superhero film, but it becomes just like another action film. Like, a lot of them are just, it's like Rambo 3 or which is a great film. Rambo First Blood Part 2 also quite good. Slash like all those films, but they become just those films. They're like just a superhero film, and like before Iron Man, no one was like, it's just another superhero film. But people say that, and it's real. Like they developed a formula of success that I don't think was totally maybe what they wanted or what was best, and that success ended up in some sense being more terrible than failure. I think for the artist. I mean, I think if you look at some of, I'm exaggerating here, but some of the masterpiece of Iron Man in I know it has some element of lightning in a bottle. Like it's Robert Downey Jr. Like he was, somebody pulled him out of a fucking brown paper bag off the side of a like rehab unit, slapped him twice and said, fucking be Iron Man. And he fucking exploded onto the stage with that. I mean, and you can't, I assume like casting and screen tests and whatever, like revealed that he was going to be that guy, but he just fucking charged back onto the stage and kickstarted that thing and kickstarted his career again in a way that was fantastic, right? And then like as they get to it seems like much the same the way they did with Infinity War. Like they knew where they wanted to get, and they're like, we got 3 films to get there, and yada yada yada, and like and they just yada 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 over like 7 to 8 films. I mean, it's successful, and like by successful I mean like they make money. And Disney makes money, and Marvel makes money, and yet all this stuff happens. But I mean, I think some elements of like, what about the story? What about like, like if it's just the characters and their interactions, like if we took the total amount of minutes of all these movies and looked at the actual moments or seconds that are like emotionally evocative and powerful, like it is a small percentage of the amount of screen time that they've spent in these 22 films. And I think that's part of what they're getting at. Like there is a kind of if they some for those of us who are Firefly fans, I mean in some sense we are blessed that like there were only 13 episodes because they never had a chance to get bad. Yeah. Right. Each one is better than the next one, so like there was never a success in that sense. It was better than failure. Failure was almost the best for it because it could be a misunderstood piece of art that we all love that had the freedom to be what it needed to be.
Right. That reminds me of a conversation happening, because as we record this, it is the Sunday of the opening weekend of Endgame. Yeah. And they've just announced the box office, which they say is probably like the greatest box office for opening weekend ever, and greatest global box office as well, besides domestic, and breaking these other records. So is obviously successful for Marvel and Disney. But there was this discussion on the Twitters about the sort of monoculture that it's creating, that there is literally like no room for either like mid-tier or smaller films. Is what it's becoming. Like films have to be this big, or this takes all the attention for theatrical films at least. And so the studios can only kind of focus on making these things with the detriment to all these smaller films, which just can't compete with that. Right. And so we don't have to get into this now, but does there have to be a breaking point where you just everything else suffers so much from that?
I mean, I think about one of my favorite sort of prognosticating films, Demolition Man, which was like a deep influence on my life. I mean, if you remember in Demolition Man, there's at one point where they go out to dinner, and he's like, "Where should I take you?" The Stallone character, and she's like, "Oh, Taco Bell," because like all restaurants are Taco Bell, like they won the franchise, right? In some sense, like I can imagine a future where all movies are Disney films, right? All movies everything are like every action film is a Marvel film because they own all of action. And, I mean, and there's a sense that
like thing people want to see,
right? That's not and it's not totally unreasonable. I unfortunately think, and I don't. I mean, I may be totally wrong about this, but like I don't think they have anywhere to go after this. I mean, and this is what I mean. This is again what I think. Why I think Endgame works is they finally they pay attention to the big arc. They pay attention to Iron Man. They pay attention to like the inner, like, you know, because what does Captain America say to him in the beginning of Avengers? Like, you don't have what it takes to make the sacrifice play, and he does, but doesn't die, right? So I mean, there's these individual characters that have their arcs, and they pay attention to that, like the conflict between Widow and Hawkeye, which gets played out in a sort of dramatic way. Not satisfied with the way that it happens. But okay, you know, fine. But but they pay attention to these arcs, and I think that's why it's successful. And you know, I am excited. I think they've learned a lot about filmmaking, and I'm excited about sort of the next generation of folks. But I can't possibly. I mean, and maybe I'm short-sighted. I can't imagine them doing anything as big as this.
Right.
Like, I mean,
like, where do you go from there?
I mean, it's not so much like I feel like they have expended almost. They have squeezed everything they can.
Right.
Out of this world, such you know, and I mean, there's only one movie about the Kree and the Skrull, you know, like, and some of the best Marvel Cinematic Universe that I love is Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. because it's about smaller characters. I mean, there's certainly possibilities there, but I mean, it just seems like, woohoo, like big party, senior frogs, but like we're done now.
Yeah, I mean,
and maybe like other people feel differently, but like I can't imagine. I mean, I literally can't think of what's going to be next.
Maybe they will take the chance to kind of pull back and tell a very focused story planned out that is smaller or more internalized.
Well, I mean, seeing Logan was. I mean, and Logan is the kind of thing that I would love to see more of.
Yeah,
like Logan's not a blockbuster.
No,
you know, like it's and Logan's not a family film.
No.
So
yeah. More of a character-driven film.
Yeah.
Great. I think we're going to wrap up the discussion there. But we will be back with more movie, TV, whatever media talk next time. And we got some good things in store.
Absolutely.
All right. Talk to you more next time.